you. So now we have an interesting talk by Ashish from ThoughtSpot. So Ashish is a distinguished developer from ThoughtSpot whose job is to look after the developer persona at ThoughtSpot, looking after the APIs and embedding in SDKs. So over to you, Ashish.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, awesome.
Cool. So, hey folks, thanks Amir, thanks Adil for that informative talk. You'll see some of what Adil talked about in these slides as well. So, as Amir said, I work at ThoughtSpot, and I work on a product called ThoughtSpot Everywhere. I'll tell more about what ThoughtSpot does and what ThoughtSpot Everywhere is about. So ThoughtSpot is a data visualization tool. These are some of our customers, and these are our partners, or basically data warehouses we connect to. And basically, you could run your visualizations or your analytics on top of these databases. You just get analytics out of it and answer your questions. So how are we different from Tableau, Looker, Power BI? All these are competitors. Basically, we are the only ones in the market to have a search interface. So like you could do like something like top 5 customers by savings in Boston, and you get a chart out of it. So basically, you just type your search query and you get a visualization. So on the back end, this results in a very complex SQL, but the user does not need to care about that SQL. They just type their search query and they get the results. Now, how is this helpful in today's world? So today's data is everywhere, right? You go to, you use Strava, you just see your stats. You use Apple Watch, you see your stats. So what ThoughtSpot wants to be is the place where you get all the facts. So if someone is building Strava, they don't need to build their own charts. They don't need to build their own analytics. They can just use ThoughtSpot and power their analytics. So that's where ThoughtSpot Everywhere comes in. ThoughtSpot Everywhere is a tool where you could embed search and AI-driven analytics into your own app. Now, be it Strava or like we have tons of customers. Strava is not one of them yet, but a lot of our customers are just using ThoughtSpot to power their own visualization and analytics. So like sports basement, this is just a sample thing. You can just have your own app, and then ThoughtSpot just integrates inside your own app, inside your app to power analytics. So what we have built is a JavaScript SDK with React components. We also expose APIs for folks to just consume like ThoughtSpot modeling and do their queries using an API interface. We also expose a ThoughtSpot modeling language to just like define data models on top of your database. And all this is powered by the ThoughtSpot platform. Of course, like the ThoughtSpot platform itself has like tons of Fortune 100 customers. It's built for scale and speed. So all this is powered by that on the background. So what makes ThoughtSpot Everywhere different? So we have live analytics, which is basically ThoughtSpot. That's what ThoughtSpot brings in. We have things called custom actions, but what I really want to focus on today is dev experience. So what makes ThoughtSpot Everywhere different is its dev experience, and I'll go over some of the things which we learned and which we found out were best practices having a good dev experience. So these are some more details into the ThoughtSpot platform itself. So basically, using the ThoughtSpot SDK, people are able to build apps. Actually, it's the other way around. People already have apps. They just use ThoughtSpot SDK to build analytics into their existing apps. Most of the times, that's what people are doing. And this is all like the ThoughtSpot layer. Like, these are layers of the ThoughtSpot platform itself. I'll not go into details there. So there are two ThoughtSpot SDKs we have right now. We have a visual embed SDK, which is to embed ThoughtSpot's visual components. Adil talked about React components, so we have exposed native JavaScript as well as React components. Basically, you could embed ThoughtSpot search, you could embed ThoughtSpot dashboards, you could embed ThoughtSpot visualizations, or you could just embed the whole ThoughtSpot app into your own application as well. So all that is made possible using a visual embed SDK. And then we also have a REST API SDK, which is a more flexible and more powerful way to embed ThoughtSpot. And basically, you just call ThoughtSpot APIs, and then you are basically building your own charts. You just use ThoughtSpot to get your to get your data or to do a search query and get the analytics out and get the results out of it. So REST API SDK is where we use API mapping today. All our APIs are basically GraphQL, and I'll go over why we use GraphQL, and then we convert all our GraphQL APIs to REST APIs using a third-party tool called Sofa. I have put the GitHub links, so both of these SDKs are open source. Actually, there is not a single REST API SDK, there is a collection of REST API SDKs as Adil talked about for each language: Python, TypeScript, Java, .NET, and those are generated using API Matic. The Visual Embed SDK is something which we have built by ourselves because there is no tool in the market which can generate visual embed SDKs right now, and where I see there's an opportunity. Both of these are open source, and you could go over and check them out. So what makes a good SDK DX? These are some of the things which we learned is what makes a good SDK. It has an intuitive and structured API interface. It should be easy to bootstrap or initialize, and the authentication piece, which is included as a part of the initialization, as Adil talked about, right? Like if you have a auth piece which takes a week to just set up, then you have lost the cause, you've lost that developer. So the easy bootstrap is a very important piece in this whole puzzle. It needs to have a live developer playground, because otherwise it's just pictures, and then it's just hard for a developer to get their hands dirty and build trust into your SDK. Needs to have good documentation, goes without saying. No performance overhead. I mean, if your SDK is adding performance overhead to the app which is using it, then they will perhaps not use it. And supports most end user platform, and Gematic does a good job there. But now these are what we feel make a good SDK DX, but the title of this talk was SDK for an enterprise. So what makes a good SDK DX for an enterprise? So when it comes to enterprise, those things are good, but in addition to that, we also need these. It has to have a good versioning scheme. It needs to be backward compatible. You cannot just release things and break what you released, break what someone might be using from 2 months ago. It needs to have a good distribution model. I'll go into details about each of these things here. It needs to be secure, and size. Like when it comes to client SDK, size also plays a huge part. It should be well tested, low regressions, and it should be able to provide escape hatches. I'll go into each of these in detail, and some of the third-party tools we use to achieve each of them. So let's start with intuitive and structured API methods. So I talked about GraphQL, and we use GraphQL for all our internal as well as external APIs. We expose a single graph for ThoughtSpot, and that graph is converted to for external use cases. This graph is converted to REST API methods using a tool called SOFA. And basically, this REST API method is nothing but an open API spec, which we can feed into API-matic, and that generates all the SDKs for us. So one takeaway for designing very structured and intuitive API methods is deep versus shallow interfaces. So this is one of the principles of programming, but it really becomes more important when designing APIs. Is your API should be deep rather than shallow. Like you have a small interface which should do a lot rather than you having a wide interface which is doing less. So a small example of this is, like, let's say you want to expose a trigger event, a trigger method for events. You could, and let's say you have multiple events you want to expose to the user which could be triggered. You could do event or trigger, and then the parameter could be the event name and payload. Or I've also seen this pattern sometimes out in some SDK where they expose a method for each event whenever a new event is introduced. So this is something what I call as an anti-pattern, and this goes into the shallow module things, because then so this API footprint becomes large, and each of those APIs just does a small thing. Whereas in the case of trigger, it's the API footprint is just trigger, and a developer just needs to know about trigger, and they know that they can just feed in the event name there. This also makes it easily backward compatible because your method name is the same. You're not introducing new methods which can break type safety as you use it. One other thing we learned was like throwing exceptions on unintended usage. So a lot of times what we saw was our developers, like developers who are using our SDKs, they were using our SDKs in an unintended way. I can maybe give you an example. Let's see if I have it here. Yeah, so I'll go into a bit of code here. Sorry about that. If you are not, it's like 6 p.m. in the evening and you don't want to read code, that's perfectly all right. But I'll give you a small example and it will be clear. So if you, we have a trusted token auth scheme which we expose in ThoughtSpot SDK. So there is this thing called this is an init method, right? So I talked about an easy init. So we expose an init method where you can just initialize the SDK. Now it like takes in like, okay, what kind of authentication you are using, what's your host name or stuff like that, and what's the endpoint for authentication, some parameters which you need to fill out, right? There was this method called getAuthToken. Now this getAuthToken, what it needs to do is it should call an API and resolve a user token for this user. Now we made it clear in the documentation that, hey, whenever getAuthToken is called by the SDK, it needs to resolve a new token. But no developers read the documentation, or even if they read it, they did not think about it. What they did is something like this. I will just resolve it with a token. And if you call it again, it will be the same token which is resolved every time. And what happens, the token expiry is like 5 minutes. So if you're after 30 minutes, if the SDK wants to re-authenticate the user, they'll get a stale token and your authentication fails. So what do we do in such a scenario, right? So what we did then is like whenever, now in our SDK we do a check that whenever we call getAuthToken, if the token we receive is the same as the last token we got, we throw an error. We just throw a modal. We just open a modal in the face of the developer that, hey, you're using a stale token. So basically, these are the things where, like, when you're building an SDK, you should, if you're able to detect these unintended usages, you should throw an error. And that error should be as loud and clear as it can be. Moving ahead, live code playground. So we should, any good SDK should expose a live code playground where they could play with the APIs. This is just a GIF of API-matic which I took out. So we use API-matic to build a playground for our REST APIs. I'll also want to show so this is our playground for API-matic, where we have all these endpoints, and then we could just select whatever language we want, and then it just you could play with the parameters and try out the API. This is for the REST APIs. We also have a playground for our Visual Embed SDK, where you could just basically select what type of embed you want to do. Suppose you want to do a search embed, and then we also give you some knobs here. So basically, this is what we call data panel in ThoughtSpot. So we expose an API that if you want to embed search, you could collapse this data panel. So if I click here, you see what happened here? If I click there, it just wrote that line of code which is supposed to do that, and then I can run it. I can just click run, and it just collapse this thing there. So now if a developer wants to use this code, they could just copy paste this code into their own app, and they would be good. So this just taught the developer how to use these APIs and how to just embed ThoughtSpot into their own apps easily because of a live playground. So what Adil talked about, that how many users are using my API and how many users were successful using my API is a big metric. If the users are not successful using my API, then it's a lost cause. So that's one of the tenets for whatever we are doing here. Moving ahead, documentation. So there are two takeaways here. We should have a way to auto-generate docs from code. So today we can write comments on top of our code methods, and that gets converted into our documentation site. And there should be auto-completion when you are actually using the SDK. So with the Visual Embed SDK, we use TypeScript. So TypeScript provides all these types, so we are able to create auto-completions. As the user is typing, as the user is using our SDK in their IDEs, they're able to get these auto completions to just ease their development. So there are a few tools we use: MDX, ASCII docs. All our documentation is in ASCII docs. We use API-matic to generate documentation for REST APIs. We use Gatsby and Vercel to create a documentation site. We use TypeDoc, this thing of converting code comments, JS doc comments to documentation is done by TypeDoc. And Algolia, Adil talked about Algolia. They are I think they are a pretty cool product where you could just integrate search into any portal you need, and it's like really easy to use. Low performance overhead. I feel SDKs are like a relay race because if your app is this guy, your SDK is this guy, because when you're running the app, at some point in time you pass the baton to the SDK that, hey, do this stuff for me, right? And if this guy is slow, you lose the race. So your SDKs cannot be slow, period. This is also one of the hardest to test and maintain because there are no good tools to continuously evaluate performance. There are profilers which you run on demand, but there are no tools which can do this as a part of your CI. Some profiler tools we use are React Profiler, Chrome Profiler, JProfile, and CProfile for backend Java and C++. Platform support, we should support all languages. Now there is no good solution for clients. For server, we have Java, Python, all these languages. You can make an SDK, you can write an open API spec and your SDK is auto-generated in these languages. But when it comes to web, there is nothing. Like we had to hand code React components which wrapped our native JavaScript. We haven't still done Vue, maybe we'll do it in the future. So if there was a tool which could auto-generate React, Vue, Svelte, there are 100 different JavaScript frameworks. If there was a tool which could generate that, that would be awesome. And I don't know if API Tech is trying to delve into that soon or not, but yeah, that is our ask. Yeah. Versioning and backward compatibility. So I feel this is one of the most important things when it comes to exposing APIs. If you update, you will update your service to a newer version, let's say 1.1, but your consumer might be using older clients. Your older clients need to continue to work with your newer API server. So what constitutes a breaking change? If you remove a field from the response, it's a breaking change. If you change an optional request field to be mandatory, it's a breaking change. If you add a new mandatory request field, it's a breaking change. If you change the default value of a request field, it's a breaking. Only these 4 changes are breaking changes. If you take care of these 4 things, you'll not have breaking changes. Which, when first I read this, it just blew my mind. I just need to take care of all these 4 things and I will not have breaking changes. But this is actually hard to do in practice. There are tools out there, and that's one reason we use GraphQL, because GraphQL provides a lot of tooling in this area where given API 1 and API 2, API interface 1 and API interface 2, the tooling can just detect that, hey, this API 2 is backward incompatible with API interface 1. So that has really helped us. We need to also define API lifecycle policy, which we just did at ThoughtSpot, where it is a 3-stage process where we announce deprecation, then we announce end of maintenance date, and then end of support date. And it should come with a sunset response header field, which was really interesting because what this does is when you're calling an API and it is already deprecated, it will come back with a header for sunset date, and the clients could use that header to inform the user that, hey, this API which you're using is actually deprecated and might be removed soon. So, and then there is this version tags we use. So in all our documentation, we always provide a version field that this API is available starting version 1.11.0. So all our API endpoints need to have these version tags because we have single documentation, but our clients could be using different versions. And when they start, they just go ahead and try to use an API and it's not available, and they complain, hey, your documentation says it's available, but I cannot use it. So that's a version thing. Distribution model. We should always distribute our SDKs using package managers. I've seen people say, hey, download the SDK from here. Never works. No one downloads your SDK. When you use a package manager, your SDK is within the development workflow of a developer. As a developer, whenever you see a developer, if they are using JavaScript, they use NPM. These are the package managers for these languages. And today's tooling is well integrated and well-oiled machinery with these package managers already integrated. I can just go into my IDE and with single clicks install packages from these package managers. So if you ask your users to download the SDK, they will not have a clue how to use the SDK, even if they download it. So a lot of friction is taken away by just using package managers. They also provide versioning capabilities here that you can publish different versions of your package, right? Like you can publish a beta version, an alpha version. We do it all the time. We have an alpha. We always have an alpha channel of our SDKs, which we use for our internal development, and also we could give it to a customer that, hey, you reported this bug, could you try out this version? And they can easily, rather than giving them a zip file with the SDK. Hey, this is a zip file for this SDK. Why don't you try it? It will be not maintainable at all. So we talked a bit about Bootstrap, auth, init. So one takeaway here was split the SDK usage into explicit initialization and the SDK usage. So I showed you that init method. So that's our initialization, and once you initialize the SDK, you can use it anywhere in your application, assuming it's already there. It takes care of the authentication piece in that init part. So make the security setup easy. I would want to show you one thing which we did here. So in our ThoughtSpot portal, we expose the security settings screen, where these 5 settings are what you need to configure. And if you go into edit here, we just these are well documented here, and we say what can go here and what sort of regexes can go here. This is, I think, still I feel this is one of the highest friction point in our SDK consumption, because people don't get security. Not everyday developer doesn't know about content security policies. Everyday developer doesn't know about course. Forget everyday developer. If I were to come back after 10 days, I'll forget what course was, because these things are so complex, right? So every time I'm reading about course, I have to start from scratch and see, oh, course is on the destination header, it just flips my mind every time. So that's why we try to make that easy for our users. So if you click on this link, we give we try to give we try to give good examples of what can go into each of these settings, how can you configure it. We go over each of these examples which you might want to use. We saw that folks really struggled with adding this stuff, and it resulted in support calls for us. One more thing I want to talk about is third-party cookies. So third-party cookies is something which is increasingly being not supported by browsers now. It's blocked by default on Safari. So one thing which we are trying to find out is a cookie-less auth system, which we could build. So today, cookie-less auth is still experimental. Not anyone does it, but that is something we would want to do. Even on API-matic, we wanted to do cookie-based authentication. But API-matic is right now token-based. But yeah, that's a separate topic. Cool. So size is one more thing here. So for clients, when your SDK is being shipped with the app and the browser needs to open the app, it loads the SDK along with the app. So if your SDK is like 5 megabytes, then and your browser and the app of the consumer is 2 megabytes, then it just defeats the purpose, right? So we use this tool called Bundlophobia, and I would encourage all of you to try it. You can just put the name of your package here, and it tells you what will be the size of this SDK. So these are two SDKs which we use today, like Hotspot SDKs. So our SDKs are like 28 KB gzip and 38 KB gzip. These are the download times which will be there, and then this is the decomposition of what is there in the SDK, which is taking up that payload. So for example, API Matic consumes around 13% of our SDK footprint, what we ship to the client. And here is where I want to make a difference. So if you see this mix panel, it's too small for you guys right now, but this is mix panel. So mix panel occupies 64% of our SDK. The mix panel client itself is 64% of our client-side SDK, which is crazy. I mean, what does it do? It just sends a request to mix panel server, and why does it need like more than half of my SDK size? Like I have written all my code within this, and they have just like what they need to do is just make an API call, and they are like 65% of my SDK, which is just really bad. But I mean, I'm stuck with Mixpanel for better or worse right now. Testing and regressions, we use like Jest to do like a code coverage on our thing. One thing which we do is just put these badges on our GitHub just to show that, hey, just to showcase that this is a good quality SDK. So we have 93% code coverage, and this is the size. This is the size of the SDK. So if you are building an SDK and you're exposing it to the public, putting these badges on your GitHub really helps showcase that the SDK is of good quality. Provide escape hatches. This one is a bit interesting. Basically, if you expose an API from the SDK, sometimes what happens is a user asks for some internal details from the SDK which may not be available to the user. So if we expose some of these internals either via private API or just hidden, you don't need to document these, but just exposing some of these internals sometimes help when you are working with a customer or when you're working with a developer who's trying to use the SDK. So one thing was, like, if you think in terms of REST APIs, capability to send additional headers on any API, right? If you have this, just build this capability in your SDK that you can send any additional headers to any API, then it will just help. Like if you haven't exposed this right now, but you might want to expose this tomorrow, but today you can just unblock someone to just add this header. Similarly, adding flags to an embedded component. So the way we expose our embedded components today are iframes. So these are iframes which are just embedding are part of Hotspot. So the way we interact with, or the way we pass payload to the iframe is via URL parameters. So what we have provided is a way to add any random parameter to the embedded iframe, so that even if we haven't exposed that API as a first-class citizen, it can still be used by someone. So this is like a bit of a rare special use case, but I've seen that it really helps sometimes dealing with developers. All right, I think I'm done. That was all. Thanks a lot, folks. It was nice chatting with you. Any questions?
Deck available?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, you can definitely share it afterwards.
okay.
If you are registered on the Meetup, then we'll definitely get in touch and send it over.
Cool. More question for me for Adil? We also.
All right. Yeah, go ahead.
When you release a new version of API, can you describe steps of SDK preparation?
Yes. So it depends what we are trying to release. So if I talk about API SDK, first part is just GraphQL inspector. So every new version of our API is basically a new GraphQL graph versus an old GraphQL graph. So the first step is to just do a compatibility check of the new GraphQL graph against the old GraphQL graph, that this is compatible or not. If there are any breaking changes, we don't allow you to publish the new version, because then older clients will take. So that's first part, and the second part is then we convert that GraphQL graph to an open API spec, and that open API spec gets consumed by API Matic, and then API Matic converts it into it generates code for different languages, and then we take that code in different languages, push it to our GitHub repository, which is the SDK GitHub repository, and then we publish each of those languages to their respective package managers on the same on a minor increment in most cases, because a minor increment is non-breaking. So we haven't done a major increment yet because we have been able to maintain backward compatibility for the most part. So yeah, that's the overall scheme of things, how it happens.
Bob, you had a question?
Yeah,
I'll come up.
I was just going to say, this could be for either one of you. Have you done any analysis, or do you have any opinions on usage or governance models in terms of things like what's the optimal rate limiting, or is there a point where you get into a paid usage? Is there trends or some optimal level that you've discovered that makes sense, especially if the API is part of your core product?
Yeah.
As well. Is there any
Yeah.
thoughts on it?
So I feel the way we handle it is by pricing. So our pricing model is API usage based. So the more you use the API, the more you pay. So in terms of rate limiting, I mean, we don't need to rate limit if you want to.
There are volume discounts. I'm trying to see.
Yeah, volume discounts are there. Yeah.
We saw a lot of the analysis. Is there an industry-wide, consensus about what are the right models when it comes to that seem to work well versus others that just get in your way? That's kind of some of the things that I'm thinking about.
Yeah. So from what I've seen in the industry right now,
Do you think yours is right?
Sorry?
Do you think the one that you're doing?
I mean, if you see the cloud providers, AWS, Google Cloud, Azure, if you go and check their pricing, it's all usage based. Number of API calls you make, you just pay like $1 per 1,000 calls, with first 1,000 calls being free. That, at least in what I have seen in the industry, most of them are priced this way. But you might have more.
There's some trends in SaaS applications on that also. The old package deals are going away in favor of usage-based pricing.
Yeah, and it ties into your own success, right? If you, let's say I sell you software for 50K, right? But then it becomes shelfware, you're not using it. Then you just paid 50K for nothing, right? In comparison, if I just say, hey, you get my software for free, just pay me whatever you use, right? For like $1 for 10 APIs, right? 10 API calls. So that way it's a win-win situation, right? Like I have an incentive to make a product which is used more, and you are only paying for what you use.
Thanks, Ashish. Does that answer your question, Bob?
Yeah. They're. I understand, on-demand models versus software models. Just specifically in the API space to drive adoption, is there some place where free better converts to paid? Is that further along? Or should you start charging right off the bat? It's a tenth of a penny every time you call it. And that's the best model, you know.
I
Does
think
anybody
it's-
know yet?
I wouldn't say so. I think it's pretty much dependent on the use case and your goals at the moment. If you're trying to drive adoption as of now, the idea would be to focus on getting people onboarded faster, maybe have a freemium tier to get them adopted first before you start charging maybe. For example, WhatsApp just launched their cloud API a couple of weeks ago, and right now that's where the goal is, adoption. And ultimately, of course, they're going to drive to sort of pricing tiers where they can start monetizing it as well. So I think it depends what your goals are and where you at your life cycle at the moment.
Yeah, sometimes there's a revenue opportunity further downstream that you want to drive a free adoption and all that. But I'd love to see some of that same analysis that you had early on, but more around the business models than the technical adoption. I think that would be useful to me.
Chris, you had a question?
I have 3 questions.
Awesome. Good luck.
So I'll just ask all 3 and then you can decide to ask them. So I saw the number 50 million developers worldwide. Just a few years ago, according to Evans, it was like 23 million. So it's like, where does that number come from? Or is that with no code, low code developers, or has it just exploded? The second and third question is probably towards you more. I was kind of intrigued, like we have one set of documentation and we document, depreciation and introduction of this. What do you do when things go away, or when you make a breaking change then, for example? Like, how do you manage to have one set of documentation? Because I love that idea, of course.
So I feel, I did not have an example for deprecations because we haven't done a lot of deprecations yet, but it would go in the same documentation that this is available from this version, and now if it is deprecated, then we'll just put a deprecated tag also. So dsdoc, typedoc is what we use. It provides a deprecated tag as well, so you could put deprecations there. So that's just a documentation piece. But I feel where it really is, what really is important when it comes to deprecations is when you are actually using the API, you message the developer that, hey, what you're using is deprecated, because you would never go to the once you know how to use the API, you would not go to documentation again and again that, hey, I'm using this API today, is it deprecated today? No, right? So when you are using it, it's at that point we should message that this is deprecated. So that is doable via sunset headers. So the REST API spec recently introduced sunset headers. So as a response header of any API call, you can send a sunset header.
So sunset header is some kind of standard that other tools understand, and
yes.
Okay.
So it's a API. It's in the REST API spec. So it's a standard header which you can send as a response, and the sunset is the key is the name of the header, and the value would be the date, and then when it will get when it will go away, or when it will be sunset. Now I don't think if a lot of clients read that yet, but a good SDK, if you're building your own SDK, you should be able to read the sunset headers and show appropriate messaging to your developers.
Okay. Have a third question as well?
yeah, but now I forgot it. Because now I started thinking about that. Oh, okay, what about the cloud event model? Is that where the sunset header should be?
So about 50 million developers, I think I took it from an article. So there are different standards going on. For example, some people say, okay, who are professional developers? So if you count developers and professional developers, they're like different counts in the word.
Yeah.
So maybe you're talking about the article where you read or learned was more talk about professional developers. And
Oh, it's even fewer according to Evans data when it's professional. Okay. Yeah, it's
So
not a lot.
I don't have internet right now, but I will send you the link of article.
No, I was just saying because that's good news. If it is 50 million, like maybe it's a lot of people that retrained during COVID, and I mean it should grow because it's so fun to code.
The number hasn't shot up, but I believe the number was 26 or so million professional developers and another 25 sort of developers that they don't count as professional developers. So it's 50 million of total sort of industry people who are coding actually.
Joyce, what about you? The
Yeah.
20 million.
Yeah, you would have a better.
So Postman has 20 million developers, meaning they're using APIs, they're consuming them, or like whatever. Do they have developer title? Not all of them do. Sometimes they're SDEPs, sometimes they're tech writers. Like, there's lots of people interacting with APIs. Our CEO has publicly announced that our goal is 100 million.
So,
from
the world has to catch up to that.
Low code, no code, like is gonna be a huge level.
Well, you're targeting 100 million users, right? So that would
Well, people
be tech writers and
People
all kinds of
consuming
people.
APIs.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Consuming or working with API?
Oh,
Okay, yeah. So creating also, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
So I found this from Stack Overflow, insights.stack overflow, and 50 million was according to a survey of 2018.
So if something happened during COVID, we'll have to revisit the numbers.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you to both our speakers. There's an announcement from Postman as well.
Yeah.
Hey,
So
Joyce, for
quick-
people joining online,
Yeah.
maybe you want to come in, Joyce.
Thanks, Samir. Hi, people online. Thank you all for coming to the Postman office and like hanging out with API people. So since you guys are here, that means you're not afraid of in-person events and you like tech. So I'm going to give a shout out for 2 events coming up next month. June 22nd, right here, Postman will be having a meetup. It's going to be Postman is one of the speakers, Stripe is one of the speakers, and Typeform. And we'll actually be fiddling with some low-code, no-code new stuff happening in Postman. And then June 23rd, also in San Francisco, but not here, it's going to be a paid workshop. So if you're working with Open API or API design or specifications and all that kind of stuff, it's an API first full day workshop. So that's my 2 points.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you very
All
much.
right. Thank you everyone for joining in. There's still a lot of food and drinks available, so let's devour the food before it gets even more cold. Thank you, everybody. Bye. I remember the third question.